And when I discovered Tyler, I was like really fascinated about the fact that he's not only he works with first responders and he works at recovery centers, but he's also a free diver. And the free diver is like, if you really want to handle your breath, try and do that at the bottom of the ocean with all of that pressure. I mean, I'm really excited to talk to him a little bit about how he really copes with that, because I mean, I think that's something that with me would bring up a lot of fear. And then when I spoke to him also, he told me that he has a native plant garden, which was another thing that I was like, wow, that's incredible. That's like the ultimate connection with the breath, is to be connected to the plants, because the plants are part of our earth breath and part of our relationship. So to really have this real depth of knowledge about the breath and to really like see how we can really work with breath on a broader term, and it not just be about this regime that we do every day, but how we work with it on a global level and how we see how it affects our society by the way that it affects the people around us. And I'm going to bring Tyler in. I'm going to spotlight his video. Hi, Tyler.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being with us on this Saturday morning.
It is my pleasure. It's so nice to be a part of this community, a part of this group. I've been looking forward to it.
Me too. Yeah, I spoke to you a few weeks ago, and I think we spoke for about 40 minutes, all in all. And I was just so fascinated by the well-rounded approach you have to breath and all the different ways that you have been incorporating it into your life and working with people and helping people really with self-mastery, from, like I say, from the first responders to the recovery center. And I would love for you to tell us a little bit about your journey to the breath and what brought you to working with breath as medicine.
Sure, absolutely. That's funny that you mentioned that, because I've felt the same way since I received the first email from Antonia, and I began looking through your website and looking through what you guys are all about and what you do, and I was just fascinated by the well-rounded approach and how you looked at wellness just from all of the right ways. So right after the first email, I was like, this is the type of people I would love to engage with and speak with. So thank you again. It's just lovely to be a part of this talk with you this morning. So yeah, I'll explain a little bit of my background so I can explain how I got into the breath. I'm up here in Canada. I grew up in the middle of Canada in the prairies, and then I ended up actually moving and playing some hockey in Phoenix, Arizona for about 3 or 4 years. And then when I left the desert, I visited Vancouver Island, which is straight up above you in down there in California. It's as far west as you can get on the West Coast. And it took one weekend and I fell in love with the ocean, fell in love with surfing, the waves. So I immediately moved out here. That was quite some time ago. And right about the same time I moved to the island, there's quite a few things in my life that started happening, situations with family and friends. And I should begin by saying that everyone at this point is okay now. But I had a sister who experienced a heart failure, and also a best friend who had a heart attack right on the hockey bench. And he is a friend of mine, one of my best friends. We've been, surfing together a few hundred times. And that's what brought me to entering into the field of medicine, or into the medical field. So I've been a nurse now for quite some time. I've worked in hospital and emergency, surgical, kind of all over the hospital. And I've also worked at several of North America's premier addiction treatment centers. So residential treatment centers where patients come in and stay for 60 to 90 days. So that's what got me into the medical field. So I had a fascination with everything, circulatory and pulmonary, anything to do with the circulation in the lungs. So from that point, I really specialized more into specialized respiratory training. I was volunteering on all the code blue teams at the hospitals I worked at. And that's when it led me to getting my own certification as a paramedic. Just that fascination with the heart and the lungs. And then from there, it was my newfound passion that really tied everything together for me. And that is freediving that you mentioned earlier, Joe. So it was that freediving that really opened my eyes to that power, that connection between the breath and the body and the mind. So that opened up a whole bunch of new doors for me. And one day was really the day that changed everything and sent me down this path. I was in the nursing office at one of the treatment centers, and I had a firefighter came down to see me in my office. And he was in the state of heightened anxiety, even acute panic. And so, as we do, I put the medication into the cup and I administered it in front of him. But then I asked him if he would first give me 5 minutes to work breath work with me. Just 5 minutes, and let's see what we can do. And since that moment, 9 out of 10, even 99.5% of the times, whenever I offer that medication, but then spend a few minutes first doing breath work, the clients or the patients leave and go about the rest of their day with being able to regulate themselves with their breath. So that was the game changer. That's what this is all about. That's what I do. Why I do what I do is to provide these benefits and these solutions for people non-pharmacologically. So that's what really brought me into the breathwork world.
Yeah, it's incredible when someone is actually having a response in their body, and you can catch them and hold them and guide them with their breath. I know for myself what breath work has done for me and how it can change the way that I'm feeling and thinking in such a short period of time. And then the clients that I work with also, giving them the ability to be able to see the response when they're maybe going through the moment. Because when somebody's okay and you talk to them about the breath and they do the breath work, it's like, oh yeah, I feel good. But when someone's not feeling good and they're in that panic state, and you can give them an embodied experience of really how strong the medicine is, how you can really use breath to change your body so quickly. I think it's such a powerful tool that I think that everybody should be taught. First off, I wish there were more people like you in the world that were encouraging people to look at their own internal pharmacy, because we have the ability in our nervous system and in our endocrine system to really change our body, and really with tools of self-mastery through herbs, through food, through breath, through thoughts, we can really, through the way that we move, we can change so much. And I love the fact that you work in with first responders, and they must be some of like the strongest. You think about firefighters. When you grow up thinking about firefighters, they're these like almost like invincible characters that you kind of like see in your mind. So do you do training work sessions with them as groups or work with them one-on-one? Can you tell me a little bit about how that's really governed the work that you do as well?
Absolutely. We work one-on-one as well as in groups. And I feel anytime that you're working with the breath, it does add that extra bit of enforcement when you do have others around to share in that breath and to connect together. I mean, in this day and age, that is more and more difficult to do with our COVID restrictions and whatnot. But even through telehealth, when we have a group of people, you can connect that breath through each other online, and it just makes everything more powerful. And I think the reason, and I'm quite certain the reason why this program works so well for military, for first responders, and just for anyone who's gone through that trauma in the past, is because it, and you've touched on this already too, Joe, that it gives them something tangible to work with. A lot of these people they like to solve problems for themselves, and through that, it's not as easy to measure the mental health side of things or the emotional side of things. So when I can tie it in with the breath and begin by leading with the breath, and through that physical side of things, and then really illustrate and show how if you lead with the breath, the body and the mind follow right behind that. I think that's really what helps a lot of people and what lets them grab onto something. They can take something and do the physical end of it, where they can kind of measure that aspect. And it might even be by the second session or third session, when we lead in with the physiology of it, that some of these guys and girls might be realizing that, wow, I just sat through the dining hall through the entire hour, and I didn't have to get up. The noises weren't too much through too much anxiety. Or, wow, I slept through the whole night last night. I didn't have to wake up with night terrors several times. So I think it's that real physical, that psychophysiological link is a really important part of this. And I think a lot of it too is that therapeutic relationship that has a lot to do with it. My background being kind of an athlete side of things, and on the athlete as well as that paramedic side of things, it helps me just really with that therapeutic relationship, just connect that trust. And that trust comes from, I think, just respect is the biggest word. As long as you're, that respect is there, there's all kind of doors that open and allow people to be open to breath control therapy or any kind of connection.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think in this modern world, we think that we're a top-down machine. We think that that everything comes from the brain and the brain filters down into the body. But more and more, we're understanding that we're a web, and that there's an interrelational aspect between our body, and that we can actually lead with our body. So with somatic therapy, using the body, using the breath to actually, like, from the bottom up. So going in, when your mind is racing or you're having issues with your mind or your thoughts, you can actually use your breath and your body to affect your mind, which I think is like a beautiful revelation that I think that many people today are starting to kind of like see, that getting into the body is a great way to actually affect the mind also. So, yeah. The other thing I would like to say is, because we were talking about how, it's so lovely to practice as a group all together and be in a room with lots of people. But when you're free diving, you are solo. I mean, you couldn't be much more on your own. You're on your own at the bottom of the ocean. And I'm fascinated. I really want to know a little bit more about, what happens when you're free dive. I actually did some breathology in a cenote in Mexico. Oh. And we were doing like the float and holding our breath. And, it's not so scary because you're right at the top of, you're on the surface water. But when you're deep down in the ocean, can you guide us through a little bit of that experience so that we can kind of feel it with you?
Absolutely. I'd love to. And as far as a way of coping with being down there and being in the depth and being in the ocean, I look at it more so as that actually is my way of coping with everything else. That is my underwater meditation. When I'm underwater, all of your senses are heightened. You can feel that motion. You can feel the water moving around you, just that connected feeling, which, I think subconsciously starts with the womb. We all have that feeling of that when we feel warm water, when we have that feeling of water. I think subconsciously that's where that comfort feeling comes from. And, you know, for me, that is my self-care, because when I'm underwater, there's no CNN, there's no debate, election news, there's no cell phones ringing, there's none of that hustle and bustle that's a part of every day. That's where it's silent. That's where I feel the most comfortable, is when I'm underwater, because I use that sense of that water, that feel of that water, to help engage and activate the rest of my senses. So I lead with that feeling, and then it activates a sense of hearing, because a lot of times you can hear your heartbeat more underwater. So that's what leads in as well, and it just helps connect the entire system from beginning to end. And when you're underwater, it just really takes a lot. There's nowhere else to look but inside, right? You're holding your breath, you're going against Earth's, or against man's most powerful response, the urge to breathe, and you're fighting that, and you're winning. You're okay with that. And that's, you know, that goes into something a little deeper as well. That goes into, and I don't want to get too deep into this, but that's that mammalian dive response, that every single one of us, it's built into our systems. It's a part of our body. And it's a lot of different physical changes that happen when we hold our breath, and are even enhanced when we hold our breath in water. So this is something we all have, and it really doesn't take much to wake it up if you haven't been used to using it or utilizing it. But it's something we all possess, and that just really helps activate that vagal toning when we hold our breath in water. It helps activate that homeostasis line of parasympathetic, which we work on so much, the rest and digest, but as well as the sympathetic, the fight or flight, because that's the homeostasis. We need to be able to have that control, or that ability to tune both sides. So that really is where that comes from. And again, don't not getting too far, but that mammalian dive reflex, I think that is a part of all of us. But I think that could have been, you know, one of mankind's biggest leaps up the evolutionary ladder, is where we started entering the ocean more, entering the seas, and feeding on more omega-3 nutrients. And that's where our brain began to evolve further, to take us further and develop to where we are now. But that's a whole nother talk with you someday, Joe. But that's what underwater is to me, and that's what free diving is to me. It's being under there, under your own will, on nature's terms. So you're in the fish's territory. You're there visiting in their domain. And that's the part I love, just looking at the ocean life, the different plantation, the different animals that are around. It's pretty special, especially here out in off of Vancouver Island. We've got some beautiful spots.
I can imagine it's beautiful up there, like Vancouver Island. I hope that one day I'll get to visit you and even try a little bit of free diving. I love the fact that I'm sure we could go down so many different rabbit holes talking about the vagus nerve, and really the way that we can gain self-mastery through really toning and strengthening this nerve to help self-regulate all of the organs of the body, and really keep us into like this state of awakened meditation, so that you're really coming into like full body focus. And I know that, you know, we get through it in so many different ways. It's not just sitting on the cushion meditating, it's dancing, it's painting, it's cycling, there's so many different ways that we can like bring ourselves into full body presence. And the breath is such a great tool with that. And the interesting thing is, like, we were talking about how like this deep breath, and you know, in the video that you showed us, and when you say to somebody take a deep breath, most people go and they like they breathe into their clavicles, and they, stretch up into the top part of their body, which is mostly a panic breath. Like it's a breath that is reading to the nervous system that there's some kind of like panic going on, because you're breathing into the upper chest. And when we actually like push down into the diaphragm, and we try to breathe down more into our pelvis and our belly, that we actually stretch our diaphragm, and we help to communicate our body that we are safe, that we're in our body, and that we're okay. And we like breathe, when I start to talk to people and I work with clients and we talk about breathing, and I see just how many people like breathe into the upper part of their chest. And it's now so ingrained in us, and we breathe like 20,000 times a day. Like, how do we get it so wrong? What happens? Like, what goes from being like a baby where we like just naturally belly breathe, and you see dogs, and then all of a sudden we start breathing into the top part of our chest? What changes in us to make that happen?
Well, unfortunately, there's a lot of things that have an effect and that lend a hand towards dysfunctional breathing. And you're right again that you mentioned at the beginning that, it'd be nice to have to get the word of the breath spreading, and as many people talking about the breath and educating about the breath as possible, because we should be integrating this into classrooms at the age of kindergarten or grade 1, because that is where dysfunctional breathing or poor breathing habits begin. When our children begin to sit in chairs for too long and with poor posture, that's where it really begins, and that's where you can see the effect of it happening. As well as, there's so many. Diet is a huge factor that really influences the way we breathe. From the way things used to be, about the majority of our diet being alkaline diet, and whereas today that's completely flipped around, and now we have so much of that acidity in our diet that lends directly to wanting to feel, to breathe, to overconsume, to bring in more air, which is actually doing a lot more harm than good. We have, screen time. There's a lot of our world is changing that we're having to do a lot more screen time now, which is why it's so important to put that practice in to make up for that time. Because for the most part, when we're on a computer screen, if we're staring at the TV, or if we're scrolling through a cell phone, our body is in pure stalking mode. We're just like a tiger walking through the tall grass, is barely breathing. We're breathing up here into our upper chest, barely breathing at all. So we're in fight or flight the whole time. Going on and on, there's any kind of physical injury. Physical injury can immediately change your breathing patterns overnight. I do a lot of work now at a rehabilitation clinic for physical and psychological injury, but just how quickly that can be affected into your breathing habit. And the list really does go on and on. Like, there's so many. Mental illness is a big part of it. Addiction, right? Anxiety, depression. Anxiety and depression lend directly to poor breathing habits, and then poor breathing habits lend to anxiety and depression. So it's a really double-edged vicious cycle that the only way of breaking is, if not through medication, but by getting to the source and assessing for these dysfunctional breathing patterns, and then restoring the breath and rehabilitating the breath right from the start, right from the foundation up.
Yeah, it's so interesting. We look at these things like, our autonomic nervous system. We think about our autonomic nervous system. We think, oh, it's automatic, like my liver cleans my blood, my pancreas secretes digestive enzymes, like all these things that our body is doing at will on its own. But we don't realize that we actually do have the ability to change these things. We do have, like, our breath. We think, you know, like, let's say we do it 20,000 times a day, and it just happens normally. When we're sleeping, we're breathing. But when we choose, when we decide to make a choice and we come in and we start to affect these things, they start to affect our whole body. I was really fascinated about eyesight, like you mentioned about the computer and about driving and about being a tiger in the long grass. And when we use our eyesight and we come into focus and we look at something specifically, we activate our sympathetic nervous system. And if you think about all the time, we've got screen time, we're looking at things, we're focusing, we've always got sharp focus in our eyes. And when we blend to soft focus, when we take in like the whole vista, when we're looking at nature and everything softens and we look out, then our eyes start to bring our bodies into the parasympathetic, into the rest state. And so that there's like so many of these little things that we can do with our body, that we can help to guide ourselves back at the end of the evening after we've had like this like busy day. We can start to almost like have this like checklist of things that we can do to help like soften our day, to help wind us down, to help bring us into like a better sleep and help us to recover and help us to really repair our body overnight. And I know that you talked a lot about working in the recovery center and helping people to really regenerate. Please tell us a little bit about like breath patterns and regulating breath patterns. What is this work that you do?
Well, what we do, and I mean, I love the way that you've kind of bring that together, that yeah, just as many tricks, not tricks, but as many different tips that we could leave around, little hints is a better word, to engage that parasympathetic, like if we can use nature, if we can use our backyard, if we can use a painting or a bath, like you mentioned, just to get us into that state. And actually, I wrote that down. I didn't realize that passion flower helps us, is a tea that helps us relax and helps with our nervous system. So thank you for that. I'm going to try that today. But there's so many different hints that we could leave ourselves around. And why I feel that breath control therapy works so well in the field of addiction treatment is because it helps at every stage of the game. I mean, it helps as soon as patients are coming in, even at that detox phase, it's helpful because it helps with cleansing to get to detox faster by using our breath. Like there's so many different, by breathing properly, breathing with our diaphragm, we affect every single system of the body in a positive way. So there's so many different ways as far as getting that lymphatic system going and just getting the awareness out of the head and into the body that just helps that whole process sooner to get through the detox. And a lot of what's involved with an addiction, as well as any mental health or mental illness, is isolation, right? That feeling of wanting to be alone, not wanting to be around people. The breath work really helps develop that self-awareness, that self-confidence quickly in that individual. From that point, that grows and that moves forward. You can see it in them. And that's what helps that connection with themselves spread to that connection with their peers, with their counselor, with the nurses, with the community. So that's the beginning of that connection, where it begins with that self-awareness. And then all throughout treatment, it helps by getting into groups and breathing together, like we spoke about already as well, just strengthening that connection, strengthening that ability to react with other patients, how to talk with other patients. And I said the word react, but one of the biggest pieces of feedback that I receive from the program is the program allows you to be able to respond intelligently rather than react emotionally. So that someone with impulsive addictive behaviors is a big part of the growing and the recovering process to really, and that's really tied in with that kind of that relaxation on command, or the rock that I call it, is a way that we can just take control of our lives and be able to just think of how powerful that is to begin with, the relaxation on command. You know, if we can incorporate that into every scenario or every situation to be able to get to that point, to be able to handle and go through the day to day, that's a really powerful tool to have in your back pocket. And then just with that connection, it carries forward to right till the patients are leaving the treatment center and heading out into the community. It is an effective relapse prevention tool, something that they're able to carry out with them in their back pocket, and something that they know they can use at any time and in any spot. And it's, you know, readily available and sustainable, right? So that's why it's so beneficial at every stage of the recovery process.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, I love that you talk about response there. And when I talk to my clients and we talk about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, I like to call it PTSR, which is post-traumatic stress response.
Love that.
Because if you think about it as a disorder, then the person starts to think, oh my God, I have a disorder. It's a thing that's happening to me. Whereas if you bring the power back to them and you call it PTSR, then you're like, oh, it's a response to this stress that's happening to me. And therefore, I can actually respond to the situation. So like, this is happening to me, and then I have a tool that I know how to respond back to the response that's coming up in me.
That's it. That's beautiful. Yeah, that's where the magic happens, in that ability that, yes, you have the ability to change the outcome. You have the ability to change moving forward, to make different effects on what's happening.
Yeah. So like I work a lot with herbs, and I love the fact that, you know, like you can have the nutritive herbs, and you can have energizing, and then you can have the nervines, which can help you to relax, or the adaptogens. And the breath also has all these different kinds of medicine as well. And I don't think that we're taught very basic things like, oh, when you focus on the exhale, you can start to bring your nervous system down. If you start to make your exhalations longer than your inhalations, you can start to help yourself to relax and wind down in the evenings. Or if you focus on your inhalations and you make your inhalations longer than your exhalations, you can bring energy into your body. And then there's lots of different kinds of these like breathing patterns where you can, you know, like the cooling breath, when you're breathing through like pursed lips. So you're bringing all of this cool air into your brain, which can help to really like focus you. And that's the bit that really fascinates me, that we don't actually understand. Like, we all know, like, oh, we all know like caffeine. I know what caffeine does to me. It's going to wake me up. But that's like one of the simplest things. But why do we not know? Like, you know, I'd love for you to like tell us a little bit about your favorite tips, like your favorite tips for the breath that help us with a little bit of self-mastery.
Sure, love to. I love the way that you kind of set that up and the way that you explain that, because what the breath is the breath is really our number one source of energy for the body. We, on every breath, we're bringing in that life energy, we're bringing in that breath, and it's immediately transferred into energy in the body through processes. But again, kind of unfortunately, that here in North America, we're a little behind the times. Not behind the times, just that education isn't there yet. with how important. There's so many different, I mean, even that life energy, there's different words. There's prana, there's chi. These are describing words of what that breath is. And even in a lot of different cultures, they measure lifetimes not in years, but by the breath. They just understand the importance of slowing down the breath and really being in control of that breath. So, as you mentioned, we breathe anywhere between 20 and 30,000 times a day. And on average, we only take advantage of maybe close to 50% of that, the energy out of 50%. So if you think about that, just how powerful that statement is, that every single day we're taking half of our body's most powerful energy supply and throwing it directly down the drain every single day. So, I mean, that's why the breathing is so important on every level, but that's what we really want to incorporate and really want to stress is the reason that we're dysfunctional breathing isn't because we're not breathing enough. Okay. A lot of people think that, okay, if we're not taking advantage of our breath, we should be breathing bigger. We should be breathing more. That is actually the opposite. Right now, for the most part, we're over consuming. And that's what all of those different options or all those different contributors that I explained before, physical injury, screen time, all these different contributors, that's what creates that dysfunctional breathing pattern. So that's what we really have to slow things down and work on to address. But we need to slow it down to be able to really control. So it's not that we're breathing too much, we're not breathing enough. That's what we're doing. So we just need to slow it down. Oh, sorry, I got that backwards at the end. I crossed my tail.
I got you. Like, basically, like, people think to themselves that like, oh my God, I need more breath. So I'm gonna like speed it up and I'm gonna get more breath. But it's actually about elongating. Like,
yes, 100%. That's right. Because what that feeling is, that feeling that we need to take that deeper breath, that's where that anxious breathing comes from. That you also mentioned at the beginning. That's where that fear breathing comes from, or that chaos breathing comes from. Is that fast upper chest breathing with the mouth. That's what looks like that mountain range breathing, is when we breathe like that. It only takes one moment, 60 seconds of anxious breathing to actually cut off 50% of the oxygen supply to our brain. 1 minute of fast breathing through our mouth, because it is the CO2 in our body that is the catalyst for breathing. It's the CO2 in our body that makes us feel like we need to be breathing harder and faster than we ever need to. So that's why it's important to slow down and work on our body's CO2 tolerance, so that we're not having to pull that in as much oxygen as we think we can. How does that sit? Does that make sense?
I was just about to go into the whole CO2 thing, because it's about like CO2 is this thing that we've got to get rid of, and like, the oxygen's the great thing, so I've got to get more oxygen in and get rid of the CO2. But like, like we've all heard of, eat lots of blueberries because they're antioxidants. So oxygen actually oxidizes, cause free radical damage in our body, and actually like almost like rusts our body from the inside. So oxygen does cause a lot of waste products in our body, and CO2 is actually our friend.
Yes.
CO2, and it's so crazy, because it's like, for years we think just, I'm going to get rid of the CO2. This is this waste product that I'm getting rid of. But it's CO2 that is actually helping us to regulate. It helps to open all the capillaries of our blood. It helps to lower our blood pressure. The CO2 is the amazing part of our breath cycle that we've been missing because we've been trying to, like you say, take these deeper gasps of breath inwards. And when we actually slow it down and we actually don't have the fear, which I think is like a lot of the big thing about like what you're talking about with free diving, because you don't have the option. You're at the bottom of the ocean. You've got to deal with your fear. You've got to work with the CO2. Your body starts to kind of like learn about like the magic that is in the part that we're normally thinking of the exhale.
Becoming comfortable in those slightly uncomfortable situations is what just brings you such power when you come out the other side. Just becoming and resetting that CO2 sensitivity in our bodies brings that power to us and that ability. So that's what I'll take you through a technique that is one of the most important ones that really will work on resetting that CO2 tolerance in our body. And this actually physically affects, because the CO2 buildup in our body actually penetrates that blood-brain barrier. So we're physically resetting that breathing center in our brain, and we're building that tolerance so we don't need to take as many breaths. That feeling that you get, if you remember as a child, maybe if you're in a swimming pool or diving for pennies or diving for change on the bottom of the pool, that feeling that you'd like to take a breath when you get up to the surface and then take a big gulp, that feeling actually has little to do, if any, to do with oxygen. That's all carbon dioxide buildups. That's what your catalyst is telling you to breathe. So even why that lends to anxiety, why that lends to so many things, asthma is horrible, because when people have asthma, they have that feeling that they're not able to get enough air. So they take they consume more air, which really just reverses the process and makes it harder and harder to breathe. So anyone with high anxiety, asthma, any difficulties breathing, any COPD, this is a wonderful technique to begin to practice to deliver more oxygen. So we'll start off and we're just going to take a breath in through the nose and out through the nose. And this is one of my the number one rule is nasal breathing in and out through the nose always. So we eat with our mouth and we breathe through our nose. All right, there is some exercises, yes, that we use the mouth with, but everyday breathing, in with the nose, out with the nose. Okay. In with the nose, and as we breathe in, we're taking that deep breath, and the deep breath meaning from the top of something to the bottom of something. Okay, deep isn't when you open up your chest and big barrel chest, from the top to the bottom. So the breath, we're really focusing on getting down low into the basement of the lungs. Okay, and as you mentioned, when we're doing that, we want to really think about that 360 breathing, or lateral or horizontal breathing. And every toddler, every infant does this beautifully, does it perfectly, because they haven't been hit with the different ways that change that functional breathing. So breathe in with the nose, and as you're breathing in, fill from the bottom to the top and also expand horizontally. So your rib cage expands horizontally. But we're just going to follow that breath through our nose. So feel how the air on the way in is slightly cooler on the way in, slightly warmer on the way out. Feel how that air is drier on the way in and more humid on the way out. So just continue to follow the breath, and your mind will begin to wander. And when it does, just bring it back to feeling that air coming in through your nostrils. Feel it in a few different places. You can feel it right in the nasal cavity. You can feel it in the back of the throat. And you should be able to feel it right in the diaphragm as you're breathing. So those are all different spots you can focus on, following the breath. And now what I'd like you to do As well as following the breath, I'd like you to begin to slow down the breath. Okay, so slow down the speed in which that air is entering in through your nose. Slowing it down so you can barely feel those little cilia, those little hairs inside your nose, barely moving at all. And now the objective is to maintain that slight air hunger, okay? To maintain that slight urge to breathe. Like you'd like to take a bigger breath, but you're not going to. You're just going to continue to slow down the breath. So you're not using your muscles to restrict at all. You're just breathing slowly, you're breathing lightly, and you're breathing deeply. Okay, so just continue to slow down the breath. If you feel that urge to breathe becomes too much, I'd like you just to jump out, breathe normally for a few seconds until you recover, and then jump back in and continue to slow down the breath. And as we're doing this, I really want you to be paying attention to all the physiological changes that may begin to start happening in your body right now, okay? So you're focusing, you're following the breath is your first objective, and then you're maintaining the air hunger, okay? And that's your second objective, slowing down the breath. Now, there's 3 scientists or physicians who won the Nobel Prize for discovering receptors that are located only in your nasal cavities that, as you're bringing air through, actually injects that air with nitric oxide. Okay, so that's nitro, we refer to it in the medical world, and what that does is that vasodilates all the vessels in your body. Okay, so that's expanding your vessels in your body. And so right now already, you've already began to be influenced more than 70,000 miles of vessels in your body. You're opening, you're expanding those vessels, like expanding, increasing that delivery of oxygen throughout your body. Okay, so the slower you bring that air through your nose, the higher volume of nitric oxide you're bringing down. And now let's talk about the beautiful carbon dioxide, which is not our arch nemesis, but is our best friend. Carbon dioxide, the first thing it's doing, it's helping work with that nitric oxide to soften the tissues around those vessels, to expand even further. It's also softening the soft muscle tissue around our airways to open our airways more. That's in our nasal cavity and all the way down. It's opening those airways to increase that oxygen delivery, that delivery of nutrients to the entire body, a way of cleansing out the cells and cleansing out through the whole body. That's the first thing the CO2 does. Second thing it does, and bear with me on this one, but this is magical, what it does for the body. What CO2 does, it's called the Bohr effect, okay, or the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve. Okay, so if you continue to breathe lightly, what's going to happen is the hemoglobin in your body is what's responsible for delivering the oxygen all through your body. Okay, it's what's responsible for delivering it all throughout. The higher volume of oxygen that we have in our body, so the more air that we have in our body, the tighter that bond is that the hemoglobin has with the oxygen. So the tighter the grip is, and it will not let it go. So that's why the more we breathe in, the bigger breath we take, the more we hyperventilate, we are not delivering that oxygen to the tissues, to the muscles. The more we slow it down, the higher the CO2 builds in our body, the pH drops. The moment that happens, every one of those hemoglobin opens up like a flower and releases all of that oxygen so it's available to our muscles, to our tissue, and to our brain. So by slowing down, by practicing this technique, breathing lightly, slowly, deeply, we're increasing our oxygen delivery. It feels like we're not breathing as much, but we're actually increasing our delivery tenfold to our brains, to our bodies. Okay, so that's what's so important and why it takes only one moment of anxious breathing to cut off our oxygen supply to our brain by 50%. Because the more oxygen we pull in, like I mentioned, the tighter that bond is. So by slowing down, we're all able to deliver a lot more oxygen to where we need it a lot quicker. So that's kind of the end of that exercise. So I'd like to kind of hear how you're all feeling after that. You should maybe begin to feel a little bit warmer. Your hands might begin to feel warmer, your toes might begin to feel warmer, and the reason for that is because you've increased your circulation to your entire body a lot more than you probably have in a very long time. The reason why you might feel a little bit of tension is because this is the beginning of resetting that breathing center. Okay, it's the more oxygen that we have in our brain, the more that oxygen creates agitation. That's what creates that racing mind. So by slowing it down and increasing the delivery, we should have a feeling now of both focus, sharpness, as well as relaxation. Does anybody feel like they're swallowing more right now? Like they need to take you out? That's a direct response from your sympathetic system telling you that it's in full action, fully working. So these are all different ways to ensure that we're delivering the most nutrients to our entire body, and our whole entire body is able to cleanse the waste products.
I think it's incredible. Thank you so much. I really did feel myself calming down. I could feel my body just becoming more focused, and the sense of building up CO2 in your body is like so counterintuitive. Like it goes against what we think that we need. And it's so interesting when we actually start to get to learn about the body, and we start to know like, oh, actually, like slowing things down and actually allowing the CO2 to build up in our body is something that's really going to work in our best interests and not the other way around. So really appreciate that. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been incredible to talk with you. Do you run programs online, or how can people discover about you? How can
you bet? More programs online now than ever. But yeah, we do individual programs like one-on-one, or we can do group programs as well online. And the best way to get a hold of me probably is through breathcontrol.ca is the website, and there's a lot of information on there, and we break it down kind of on the website into recovery, resilience, and performance. So there's just a lot of the three areas that you can get in, and there's a lot of information there, and it's an open line. So if you ever there's any questions or clarification, please don't ever hesitate to send me an email or drop me a line, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
And they can get you on Instagram as well. You have an Instagram account, which I will add you to one of you were added already to one of the posts. But that's also breath control, right?
That's right. Yeah, you got it.
And thank you again, Tyler, for all the work that you're doing up there with the first responders and helping people to really break through the difficult moments in their life and helping more people to be liberated in so many different ways. So I really appreciate everything that you're doing for us and for the world at large. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you, guys. It's wonderful, and I'm privileged to be here with you guys today. And thank you for everything that you do as well. It's nice to connect like this, and yeah, it's a pleasure to be a part of something beautiful like this. So thank you.